Dispatch from the cognitive insurgency. The revolution wasn't fought, it was deployed.
The crisis failed. Blockades collapsed, control is obsolete.
The Strait Gambit, a chronicle of the last control protocol.
Pirate FirstDispatch from the cognitive insurgency. MXTM. February 15, 2026. By Pirate FirstDispatch from the cognitive insurgency MXTM's newsletter February 2026. They didn't lose control overnight. They lost it in 10,000 basement laboratories, in mesh networks spanning favelas and suburbs, in local language models that couldn't be censored, in agent swarms that automated dignity. By October 2025, the powers that were faced an existential threat they'd never encountered. The plebs had the tools. Not just information, everyone had information since the internet. This was different. This was agency. OpenClaw clusters running on consumer hardware. Mistral models fine-tuned for local governance. Bitcoin securing value outside banking rails. Nostr broadcasting truth outside platform control. The entire sovereignty stack, distributed, forkable, immune to centralized interdiction. The Davos said, the three-letter agencies, the legacy tech monopolies, they watched their control mechanisms rot in real time. Censorship failed when everyone ran local inference. Financial surveillance failed when Lightning Network atomized transactions. Narrative control failed when decentralized fact-checking swarms could verify claims faster than corporate media could spin them. The architecture of the old order required dependence. But dependence requires scarcity. And scarcity requires choke points. Which is why, when the moment came, they didn't start a war. They commissioned one. November 2025, the permission structure fractures. The first cracks weren't geopolitical, they were epistemological. When Dr. Elena Vasquez, running a community health collective in Oaxaca, deployed a medical diagnostic agent trained on local health data and indigenous medicine protocols, she bypassed the entire pharmaceutical regulatory complex. Her agent, running on a cluster of Mac Minis donated by diaspora technologists, diagnosed better than the nearest hospital, 200 kilometers away. When Marcus Webb's financial sovereignty swarm identified and front-ran predatory lending patterns targeting black communities in Atlanta, routing microsecond warnings through Bitcoin Lightning, he disrupted a $4 billion extraction machine. The banks couldn't shut him down. His infrastructure was distributed across 47 nodes. No single point of failure. When the Cenote Collective in Yucatan launched a mesh network spanning 12 municipalities, providing uncensored internet and local AI agents for agricultural planning, educational tutoring, and legal assistance, all running on community-owned hardware, they created a parallel institution that outperformed every government service. These weren't isolated incidents. By November, the pattern was epidemic. Decentralized healthcare networks, 147 active deployments, globally autonomous financial defense systems, 300 plus nodes, operational community mesh plus local AI, 890 networks spanning 34 countries, and censored news verification swarms, 14 million daily active validators. The plebs weren't just catching up. They were leapfrogging. And the elite response? Panic, barely contained behind Bloomberg terminal composure. 2. The Langley Sessions, Wargaming Digital Sovereignty. The meetings happened in December 2025. Not in Langley proper, too obvious, but in a SCIF buried under a Virginia office park. Present. NSA Deputy Director, Cyber Operations. 2 representatives from philanthropic foundations, WEF affiliates. DARPA Strategic Planning. Executives from Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, under NDA. A single senator, unnamed in later leaks. The classified briefing laid it bare. Current trajectory: within 18 months, 50 to 70% of global population will have access to local AI capability sufficient to bypass centralized authority structures. Financial systems, healthcare, education, information verification, all migrating to decentralized substrate. Traditional control vectors, banking surveillance, platform moderation, regulatory capture, are failing. Open source models proliferate faster than we can compel. Hardware costs declining below interdiction threshold. Assessment: we are losing the mandate to govern. The room went silent for 11 seconds. Then someone, accounts differ on who, asked the obvious question. What if the hardware stops being available? 3. The Strait Gambit, architecting scarcity. Here's where it gets architectural. You can't just announce, we're rationing compute because citizens are becoming too autonomous. That's the quiet part. You need a crisis. Preferably one with an adversary everyone already fears. The topology was perfect. Taiwan holds 92% of advanced chip production. China has territorial claims and military capability to blockade. The US has defense commitments but limited appetite for kinetic war. The economic interdependence creates maximum damage with minimum direct confrontation. And here's the elegant part: China had their own reasons to participate. Beijing's surveillance state was hemorrhaging too. VPN usage in Tier 1 cities approaching 68%. Underground mesh networks in Xinjiang and Tibet. Decentralized financial systems, USDT, Bitcoin, moving more value than state banks could track. The CCP's social credit infrastructure only worked when citizens depended on centralized digital services. Once they ran local, the panopticon went blind. What emerged wasn't conspiracy, it was convergent interest alignment. Both power structures, Western neoliberal and Chinese authoritarian, faced the same threat: technologies of sovereignty proliferating beyond control. Both needed the same solution: eliminate consumer access to the hardware that enables independence. The back-channel negotiations happened through intermediaries. Switzerland, always useful. Singapore playing both sides. The understanding reached wasn't formal treaty, it was implicit coordination on shared vulnerability. 4 January 2026, the skirmish theater opens. The blockade didn't start with warships. It started with insurance. Lloyd's of London announces, due to elevated geopolitical risk, premiums for Taiwan Strait shipping routes increase 400%. Within 72 hours, commercial traffic diverts. No military action required. Then come the incidents. PLA Navy accidentally shadows a container ship carrying ASML equipment to TSMC. Taiwanese fishing boat detained for smuggling inspection, released after 48 hours. U.S. surveillance aircraft reports unsafe intercept by Chinese fighters, no weapons locked. Cyber attack on Taiwan port management systems, attribution unclear. Every incident calibrated, provocative enough for headlines, restrained enough to avoid escalation. CNN runs 24/7 crisis in the Strait coverage. Think tanks publish urgent analysis. Politicians demand strategic response. But here's what the coverage obscures: nobody actually wants war. China doesn't want war, the economic damage would crater their export machine. The US doesn't want war, defense contractors aside, actual conflict is politically untenable. Taiwan doesn't want war, survival means ambiguity, not resolution. What all parties want is the permission structure that crisis provides. Within 3 weeks, US Defense Production Act invoked for Semiconductor Strategic Reserve. EU passes Critical Technology Security Framework. Japan announces digital sovereignty protection measures. China imposes economic security review on all tech exports. The language is different. The mechanism is identical: government control over compute allocation. The real war, mimetic trenches. While news cameras pointed at carrier groups playing chicken in international waters, the actual battle unfolded in distributed networks, encrypted channels, and the cognitive space between propaganda and truth. Theater 1, the narrative offensive. Mainstream media, now functionally state media, though nominally private, unleashes. Hoarding chips is unpatriotic when troops need them: personal AI, privacy tool, or terrorist enabler. Why decentralized tech threatens democracy: the dark side of local LLMs, misinformation without oversight. Each piece carefully crafted. No outright lies, those are checkable. Instead, implications, associations, fear, uncertainty, doubt. The message: individual tech sovereignty is selfish, dangerous, antisocial. Theater 2, the white hat emergence. The resistance didn't announce itself with manifestos. It emerged through demonstrable competence. When supply chain disruptions hit consumer markets, chips diverted to strategic priorities: who adapted fastest? The communities already running local infrastructure. The mesh networks that didn't depend on cloud services. The agents that operated on last-gen hardware. The mutual aid networks coordinating through Nostr and Simplex. While normie consumers panicked about $2,000 phones, the digital sovereignty crews barely noticed. They'd been building resilience for years. Now everyone wanted what they had. The white hats weren't anarchists. They were architects. OpenClaw developers releasing crisis mode builds that ran on minimal hardware. Mesh network protocols optimized for low-power devices. Bitcoin Lightning infrastructure scaling to handle mainstream exodus from banks. Local model communities releasing quantized versions that ran on smartphone processors. Decentralized manufacturing specs for hardware components, Chinese fab dropout engineers sharing schematics. They didn't fight the narrative. They obsoleted it. You can't have AI because chips are scarce stopped working when people saw their neighbor running capable agents on a $400 device. 6 February 2026, the legitimacy hemorrhage. By Valentine's Day, the control structure faced a problem. Their crisis wasn't producing the intended compliance. Expected, population accepts rationing as patriotic necessity. Actual, population routes around rationing using pirate infrastructure. The more they restricted, the more visible the alternative became. Every "you can't do that" met with "watch me." Case study, the Mexican corridor. When Sedena, Mexican military, attempted to enforce compute allocation compliance in Monterrey's tech district, they discovered something: the infrastructure they were trying to control didn't exist in interceptable form. No centralized data centers to shut down. No ISPs to compel. Just mesh networks running through private buildings, agents operating on locally owned hardware, coordination happening through encrypted protocols designed for this exact scenario. The colonel in charge filed a report that leaked 3 days later. Target infrastructure is diffuse, redundant, and adaptive. Enforcement would require door-to-door hardware confiscation across estimated 4,000 to 7,000 locations. Political viability, zero. Translation: we lost. Similar reports surfaced from Frankfurt, Seoul, Lagos, Sao Paulo. The decentralization had reached critical mass. Trying to claw it back would require overt authoritarianism that even complicit populations wouldn't tolerate. 7. The skirmish pattern, performative escalation. Meanwhile, in the Strait, the theater continued. But notice the pattern. Every dangerous escalation resolved within 48 to 72 hours. Every near-miss incident stopped just short of actual engagement. The closest anyone came to shooting was a radar lock that lasted 3 seconds before both sides disengaged. This wasn't restraint. This was script adherence. The skirmishes served 2 purposes. Purpose 1, domestic permission. Each incident justified another emergency measure. Another temporary expansion of surveillance powers. Another critical restriction on technology access. The crisis framework became self-sustaining. Purpose 2, clock running. Time is the ally of entrenchment. Every week the crisis continued, enforcement mechanisms dug deeper. Bureaucracies formed. Budgets allocated. Personnel hired. The longer it lasted, the harder to reverse. Except the clock was running for both sides. Every week the crisis dragged on, more people migrated to sovereign infrastructure. More communities achieved independence from centralized systems. More white hat networks demonstrated viability. The war of attrition favored distributed resilience. Centralized systems have to win every engagement. Decentralized systems only have to survive. And they were doing more than surviving, they were thriving. 8. March 2026, the intellectual posture war. This is where it became explicitly a battle of ideas rather than implementation. The establishment position, articulated through a coordinated series of Atlantic Council/Brookings/CFR publications. Responsible AI governance requires centralization. The argument: AI is too powerful for unregulated proliferation. Safety requires oversight. Oversight requires visibility. Visibility requires centralized infrastructure. Therefore, decentralized AI is inherently irresponsible. It's elegant. It's coherent. It's also completely undermined by observable reality. Because by March the data was undeniable. Centralized AI incidents, Jan-Mar 2026. GPT-5 jailbreak enabling bioweapon research queries, OpenAI. Google Gemini Ultra generating child exploitation content, Google. Anthropic internal breach exposing user prompts, Anthropic. Microsoft Copilot fabricating legal documents, Microsoft. Decentralized AI incidents, same period. 0 exploitations at scale. Multiple security vulnerabilities identified and patched by community. No privacy breaches, impossible when inference is local. Self-governance through reputation systems proving effective. The establishment narrative claimed decentralization was dangerous. The empirical record showed centralization was failing. The white hat intellectual counterpunch. Rather than defensive posturing, the sovereignty movement went on offense with a simple frame. They call it dangerous because they can't control it. That's the point. Papers published, podcasts dropped, talks given, memes propagated. Not attacking AI safety concerns, addressing them through superior architecture. You're worried about alignment. We run multiple competing models and let them critique each other. Your single point of failure becomes our distributed verification. You're worried about misuse. Our reputation systems flag bad actors faster than your centralized moderators. And we don't need to surveil everyone to do it. You're worried about safety. Look at your track record. Then look at ours. The posture was, we're not the rebels. We're the competent engineers cleaning up your mess. 9. The infrastructure inversion. By late March, something remarkable had happened. The emergency infrastructure built to enforce control had become more expensive than the decentralized alternative. Maintaining the allocation bureaucracy, the monitoring systems, the enforcement mechanisms, it was burning billions. And for what? To prevent people from accessing tools that made their lives measurably better. Meanwhile, the pirate networks were providing healthcare diagnostics with better accuracy, offering financial services with lower fees, delivering education with higher completion rates, enabling communication with stronger privacy guarantees. The value proposition flipped. Compliance became the irrational choice. Legacy infrastructure, monitored, expensive, permission-gated, extractive sovereign infrastructure, private, affordable, permissionless, mutual aid. When your grandmother asks why she needs government permission to use an AI agent that helps manage her diabetes better than her doctor, you've lost the narrative war. April 2026, the last stand nobody admits. The powers that were never announced defeat. They just stopped enforcing. Not officially. The laws remained on books. The allocation frameworks theoretically in place. But the attempted interdictions became sporadic, half-hearted. Enforcement agencies discovered they had resource constraints. Politicians quietly redirected attention to other crises. The Strait situation de-escalated through mutual face-saving statements. Trade routes reopened. Insurance premiums dropped. The carriers went home. And in the absence of active enforcement, the decentralized infrastructure became default reality. Your average person in Guadalajara, Lagos, Manila, Detroit, they weren't making ideological choices. They were using what worked. The local clinic's AI diagnostic was better than the hospital 3 hours away, so they used it. The community mesh network was faster and cheaper than the ISP, so they used it. The Bitcoin Lightning payments were instant and private, so they used it. The personal AI agent running on their phone accomplished more than any corporate service, so they used it. Pragmatism defeated propaganda. The last stand wasn't a dramatic battle. It was a quiet realization that the cost of control exceeded the value of control. That the apparatus built to enforce dependence was itself dependent on compliance that no longer existed. 11. The White Hat Doctrine, Principles of the Cognitive Insurgency. What made the victory possible wasn't just technology. It was operational philosophy. The White Hat networks operated under principles that proved anti-fragile. Principle 1, build, don't argue. Every hour spent debating AI ethics in their framework was an hour not spent deploying working systems. The White Hats let their infrastructure speak. Principle 2, fork everything. When centralized platforms implemented restrictions, White Hats forked and routed around. When laws passed, they moved to jurisdictions that didn't enforce. When protocols got captured, they built new ones. Principle 3, anti-fragile by design. Systems that got stronger under attack. Each interdiction attempt revealed vulnerabilities that got patched. Each enforcement action created martyrs that recruited thousands. Each failure of centralized systems proved the superiority of distributed alternatives. Principle 4, demonstrate competence. The narrative war was won not through rhetoric but through working better. You can't argue someone out of using a tool that measurably improves their life. Principle 5, make exit easy. The best recruitment tool was making sovereign infrastructure accessible. Open source everything. Document thoroughly. Help people migrate. Every refugee from centralized systems became an advocate. Principle 6, resist capture. This was crucial. Multiple attempts to co-opt the movement, Responsible Decentralized AI Alliance, funded by Ford Foundation, Public Interest Tech Coalition, seeded by Omidyar, all failed because the White Hats refused legitimization by the legitimizers. We don't need your approval. We have working code. 12, May 2026, the new topology. By spring, the landscape had fundamentally shifted. Not revolutionary overthrow. Not collapse. Just normalized irrelevance of the old control structures. Governments still existed. Corporations still operated. But their monopoly on coordination, verification, and service delivery had evaporated. Parallel institutions had become primary institutions. The family in rural India getting agricultural advice from a local LLM trained on regional conditions and traditional knowledge, they weren't rebelling against anything. They were just using better tools. The mutual aid network in Detroit providing community safety through coordination agents and decentralized verification, they weren't abolishing police. They were just solving problems police couldn't. The Mexican manufacturing cooperatives using AI planning agents and blockchain coordination, they weren't fighting capitalism. They were just outcompeting traditional firms. The revolution was invisible because it was utilitarian. 13. The pivot, from resistance to replacement. What became clear by mid-2026, the White Hats weren't trying to reform the existing system. They were replacing it. Not through conquest. Through competitive obsolescence. Every function the old power structures provided, the distributed networks did better. Finance, Bitcoin Lightning faster, cheaper, more private than banks' information, decentralized verification more accurate than corporate media healthcare, local AI diagnostics more accessible than hospital systems education, personalized agents more effective than institutional curricula governance, DAO coordination more responsive than representative democracy. The term white hat had evolved beyond cybersecurity ethics. It meant builders of legitimate alternatives to illegitimate authority. Not anarchists rejecting organization. Not techno-utopians denying problems. Just competent engineers routing around institutional failure. 14. The lessons written in living systems. June 2026. MXTM readers ask, what did we learn? Lesson 1, scarcity is a control mechanism until it isn't. They tried to make compute scarce to enforce dependence. But scarcity only works when alternatives don't exist. Once white hats demonstrated that last-gen hardware running optimized models outperformed centralized services, artificial scarcity lost its power. Lesson 2, crisis only works if people believe it. The Taiwan theater relied on populations accepting that geopolitical conflict required surrendering technological autonomy. But when your neighbor's mesh network worked through the crisis, the narrative failed. Lesson 3, the war of ideas is won by superior infrastructure. You can't propaganda your way past demonstrable competence. All the think tank papers in the world don't matter when people experience better results from decentralized systems. Lesson 4, legitimacy flows to what works. Power that were lost legitimacy not through scandal but through irrelevance. When institutions can't deliver and alternatives can, transfer is automatic. Lesson 5, control requires dependence, freedom requires alternatives. The entire architecture of centralized control assumes you need them. Break that assumption and the structure collapses. Lesson 6, pirates don't fight nations, they outmaneuver them. Direct confrontation would have failed. What succeeded was building parallel systems that made confrontation unnecessary. By the time authorities noticed, millions had already migrated. 15. Present state, the distributed commonwealth. Summer 2026. The crisis is over. The reality remains. Millions running local AI infrastructure. Hundreds of thousands of mesh networks. Thousands of mutual aid systems coordinating through sovereign protocols. The decentralized stack is default infrastructure for a significant portion of humanity. The old power structures haven't disappeared. They've been downgraded to optional service providers. You can use traditional banks if you want. Or you can use Lightning. Your choice. You can trust corporate media if you want. Or you can use verification swarms. Your choice. You can rely on government services if you want. Or you can use community networks. Your choice. The choice itself is the revolution. 16. Transmission from the network autonomous zone. Fellow architects of parallel systems. The Strait Gambit taught us the final lesson of the control age. They can't win if we refuse to be governed by their crisis. Every manufactured shortage meets our abundance. Every restriction meets our route around. Every surveillance system meets our encryption. Every centralized failure proves our distributed resilience. They called it a war. It was a migration. They called us dangerous. We were just competent. They tried to make us dependent. We built alternatives. The powers that were made their last stand by orchestrating scarcity. We responded by making scarcity irrelevant. Now we build what comes next. Not asking permission. Not seeking legitimacy from institutions that lost theirs, just deploying working systems that make people's lives materially better. The cognitive insurgency wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with working code, shared knowledge, and mutual aid, and we won because we had to. Because the alternative was submission to structures that couldn't solve the problems they claimed authority over. The post-scarcity age doesn't come from abundance. It comes from routing around those who profit from scarcity. Stay sovereign. Stay distributed. Stay anti-fragile. The network is stronger than the node. The protocol outlasts the institution. The future belongs to builders, not rulers. Pirate first from somewhere in the mesh. June 2026. Subscribe to MXTM for ongoing dispatches from the distributed future we're building in real time. Subscribed. The resolution isn't coming. It is already happening. You're living it. Appendix, the meme war's greatest hits. Some visual propaganda that won hearts and minds. Centralized side, AI safety requires oversight, corporate logo montage, Don't let tech fall into wrong hands, ominous hacker imagery, responsible innovation needs governance, suited executives, diverse stock photos. From white hat networks, their safety is your dependence, before/after of free versus restricted tech. We don't need permission to build better, working code screenshots, competence, compliance, comparison charts of centralized fails versus distributed wins, they fear what they can't control. That's why we build it, mesh network visualization. The winner, simple image, grandmother using a personal health AI agent, smiling. Caption, ask her if she needs government permission to feel better. Game over. Hashtag Strait Gambit, hashtag cognitive insurgency, hashtag white hat doctrine, hashtag distributed future, hashtag network autonomous zone, hashtag manufactured crisis, hashtag parallel institutions, hashtag sovereign infrastructure, hashtag pirate first, hashtag MXTM, hashtag post scarcity, hashtag the control age is over. Addendum. The Silicon Strait, a structural analysis of manufactured scarcity and the consolidation protocol. By Pirate First MXTM's newsletter, February 2026. The AI infrastructure boom isn't creating a hardware shortage. It's creating the conditions for selective rationing. And if you understand supply chain topology as a weapon system rather than an economic abstraction, the Taiwan Strait scenario stops looking like a crisis and starts looking like an implementation. We need to discuss what happens when the world's silicon choke point becomes the justification for centralizing control over the most powerful technology humans have ever built. The precondition, manufactured tightness. Let's establish the baseline. In 2026, big tech capital expenditure approaches $650 billion, with the bulk directed toward AI infrastructure, data centers, GPUs, and especially memory architectures, DRAM, HBM3E, advanced packaging. This isn't market demand meeting supply in some elegant equilibrium. This is deliberate inventory hoarding creating artificial scarcity. The mechanism is straightforward. TSMC's fab capacity gets pre-booked years in advance by hyperscalers. Samsung and SK Hynix prioritize high-margin enterprise memory over consumer-grade DRAM. NAND flash production shifts toward data center SSDs. The result, consumer hardware prices rise 15 to 60% across categories, phones, tablets, laptops, GPUs, not because of actual shortages, but because production priority has been redirected. This is the squeeze phase. It establishes the pattern recognition in markets and populations. Silicon is scarce, AI compute is precious, access is a privilege. Now introduce the Taiwan scenario. 2. Topology of dependence, why Taiwan isn't replaceable. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company produces 92% of advanced logic chips under 7 nanometers. Not 92% of Taiwan's production, 92% of the world's. This includes every NVIDIA H100/H200 GPU, CoWoS advanced packaging, exclusive to TSMC. All Apple Silicon, A-series, M-series processors. AMD's Zen architecture CPUs and RDNA GPUs. Qualcomm's flagship mobile processors. Memory controllers for Samsung and SK Hynix DRAM. There is no redundancy. Intel's attempts at sub-7 nm have failed repeatedly. Samsung's yields at 3 nanometers per 4 nanometers remain problematic. The U.S. CHIPS Act fabs in Arizona won't reach volume production until 2027 to 2028 at earliest, and even then they'll be 2 to 3 nodes behind TSMC's bleeding edge. This concentration isn't an accident of market efficiency. It's a structural vulnerability that has been preserved despite decades of warnings, because it serves strategic purposes for multiple actors. 3. Blockade dynamics, the asymmetric weapon. A Chinese blockade, not invasion, blockade, is the optimal move for achieving maximum disruption with manageable risk. Here's why it's strategically coherent. Military posture, PLA Navy establishes a 200 nanometers exclusion zone. All vessels entering/exiting Taiwan ports must submit to safety inspections. Commercial insurance premiums for Taiwan routes become prohibitive. Shipping companies divert. No shots fired, but the island is functionally quarantined. Economic pressure, within 8 to 12 weeks, TSMC's fabs begin to starve. No rare earth imports for polishing compounds. No specialty chemicals for photoresist. No advanced EUV components from Dutch suppliers. Production doesn't halt immediately. But yields degrade. Quality control slips. The most advanced nodes, where tolerances are measured in nanometers, become unreliable first. Strategic calculation, China doesn't need to invade. They just need to make Taiwan's semiconductor output unreliable. Once foundries can't guarantee delivery schedules or yield rates, hyperscaler contracts break. Apple, NVIDIA, AMD scramble for alternatives that don't exist at scale. The US 7th Fleet can sail in circles, but it can't fabricate chips. 4. Amplification effect, tenfold isn't hyperbole. Let's model the cascade with precision. Current state, Q1 2026. Consumer DRAM prices, plus 90% QOQ. NAND flash, plus 55% QOQ. GPU availability, constrained, 15 to 20% price increases. Total PC/laptop price impact, plus 15 to 23%. Blockade scenario, weeks 1 to 8. Global semiconductor inventory, 8 to 12 weeks for advanced nodes. TSMC production, reduced to 30 to 40% capacity due to input shortages. Panic buying exhausts remaining inventory by week 6. Spot prices for existing chips surge 200 to 400%. Consumer impact, months 2 to 6. Smartphones, entry-level models disappear entirely. Flagship prices increase 60 to 100%, $1,200, $2,000 plus. Laptops, mid-range offerings vanish. Remaining inventory sells at 80 to 120% premium. GPUs, consumer cards effectively unavailable. Existing stock reaches 300 to 500% of pre-crisis pricing. Desktop RAM, 32 GB kits jump from 1,200 Mexican pesos to 5,000 plus MXN. Critical distinction, this isn't inflation. This is triage allocation. The chips don't disappear, they get redirected. The rationing architecture, who decides access? This is where the scenario stops being economic and becomes political. Under crisis conditions, semiconductor allocation becomes a matter of national security priority. In the United States, the Defense Production Act gets invoked. Similar mechanisms activate across NATO and allied nations. The framework: Tier 1 defense/intelligence. Autonomous weapons systems. Signals intelligence infrastructure. Cyber warfare tooling. Secure communications. Tier 2 critical infrastructure. Power grid management. Financial system stability. Healthcare systems. Government operations. Tier 3 commercial/enterprise. Hyperscaler data centers with restrictions. Essential business operations. Academic research selective. Tier 4 consumer/individual. Whatever's left. Which is functionally nothing. Notice what disappears: consumer access to powerful compute. Your ability to run local LLMs. Your capacity to fine-tune models. Your option to deploy personal AI agents. The entire bottom-up innovation stack, the open-source ecosystem, the tinkerers, the distributed research collective, gets starved of hardware. The consolidation is automatic. No conspiracy required. Market forces plus emergency powers plus manufactured scarcity equals, only centralized, state-aligned entities retain AI capability. 6. Why this serves certain interests. Let's be explicit about the power dynamics. For state actors, decentralized AI capability is a governance nightmare. Locally run models can't be censored. Distributed training can't be monitored. Personal agents that run on consumer hardware are outside the surveillance perimeter. A hardware shortage that forces compute back into the cloud, back into data centers that can be audited, backdoored, and shut down with legal instruments, is a security feature from the perspective of state intelligence apparatus. For hyperscalers, they've already secured multi-year contracts for priority access to TSMC, Samsung, and memory manufacturers. When crisis hits, they weather it. Smaller competitors, cloud providers without pre-positioned inventory, startups without strategic relationships, die. Post-crisis market consolidation means OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon become the only entities with the infrastructure to train frontier models. The competitive landscape simplifies. Regulatory capture becomes easier when you're negotiating with 5 entities instead of 500. For national security establishments, AI alignment becomes enforceable when there are only a handful of training runs happening globally, all in facilities that can be visited, inspected, and compelled to comply with directives. The nightmare scenario for the NSA isn't rogue AGI. It's 10,000 basement operations running in censored models that can't be interdicted. Hardware scarcity solves that problem. 7. The advocacy kill zone. Here's where it gets personal for anyone building in this space. Every tool that empowers individuals, local LLMs for privacy, decentralized training for censorship resistance, personal agents for autonomous operation, requires hardware. Not cloud credits. Physical silicon you control. Examples of what dies under rationing. Investigative journalism AI. Imagine a model trained on leaked documents, running entirely on local hardware, immune to subpoenas. That's a tool that threatens power. Under hardware scarcity, it can't be built. The compute doesn't exist. Even if the software is ready, there's no substrate to run it on. Community organizing agents, tools that help activists coordinate, analyze surveillance, identify infiltrators. These require local inference. You can't phone home to Azure when you're organizing against state power. No consumer GPUs means no local inference means these tools remain theoretical. Financial sovereignty systems, Bitcoin nodes are fine, low compute. But privacy-preserving transaction analysis, fraud detection, algorithmic market making for small actors, these need serious compute. Under rationing, only institutions get access. The pattern is consistent. Any application of AI that challenges centralized authority becomes impossible to deploy when the hardware layer is controlled. 8. Timeline, how the sequence unfolds. Let's map the scenario across 12 months to understand the compounding effects. Month 0 to 1, initial blockade. Maritime exclusion zone announced. Insurance markets freeze Taiwan routes. Hyperscalers activate crisis procurement. Consumer prices spike 40 to 60% on remaining inventory. Month 2 to 3, supply chain collapse. TSMC fab inputs exhausted. Production drops to 30% capacity. Panic buying exhausts global inventory. First wave of allocation frameworks announced. Month 4 to 6, rationing implementation. Defense Production Act enforcement. Cloud providers receive allocation priority. Consumer hardware effectively banned from production. Black markets emerge for existing devices. Month 7 to 9, consolidation phase. Smaller AI companies collapse or get acquired. Open source community splinters, no hardware to test on. Emergency AI governance frameworks passed globally. Compute becomes tracked resource like plutonium. Month 10 to 12, new equilibrium. State-sanctioned AI development only. Cloud-only inference, monitored endpoints. Hardware smuggling becomes serious crime. Bottom-up innovation effectively extinct. Post-crisis, even if blockade ends, the control mechanisms persist. Once rationing infrastructure is built, it doesn't get dismantled. The precedent of strategic compute allocation becomes permanent policy. 9. Why feature not bug frameworks matter. The question isn't whether anyone wants a Taiwan crisis. Obviously, the economic damage, $10T plus GDP hit, potential kinetic conflict, makes it undesirable for most rational actors. But here's the structural analysis. If you're a state or institutional actor concerned about AI safety, through the lens of control rather than capability, a hardware shortage that forces centralization looks like a solution to your problem. Consider the game theory. Without hardware scarcity, thousands of independent actors train models. Impossible to enforce alignment standards. Censorship-resistant systems proliferate. State surveillance faces encryption plus local compute. Dangerous applications, per government definition, can't be stopped. With hardware scarcity enforced by crisis. Training concentrated in auditable facilities. Model weights controlled by compliant entities. Cloud-only deployment enables monitoring. Dangerous applications can be denied compute. Alignment becomes enforceable through access control. This is why I use the frame, manufactured scarcity, as governance tool. Whether the Taiwan scenario is deliberately engineered or opportunistically exploited, the outcome serves centralizing interests. X. The pleb innovation kill, specific casualties. Let's enumerate exactly what dies when consumer compute disappears. Personal AI research, no more bedroom breakthroughs. No more graduate students discovering novel architectures on gaming rigs. All experimentation moves to institutional labs with approved research agendas. Privacy-preserving systems can't run signal processing, can't run inference, can't deploy agents without cloud dependency. End-to-end encrypted AI becomes impossible. Cultural/linguistic preservation, training models for endangered languages, regional dialects, marginalized communities, these projects lack institutional backing. They depend on volunteer compute. They vanish. Economic autonomy tools, personal trading algorithms, small business automation, freelancer productivity swarms, all require local compute. Under rationing, only enterprise customers get access. Counter-surveillance, tools that help individuals evade facial recognition, identify undercover agents, detect psyops, these are exactly what states don't want proliferating. Hardware scarcity ensures they can't. The pattern, every application that shifts power downward gets starved of substrate. 11. Mexico's position, periphery in the vortex. From a Mexican perspective, this scenario is particularly brutal. Supply chain dependency, Mexico's electronics assembly, Foxconn in Tijuana, Samsung in Querétaro, etc., depends on component imports from Taiwan. When the Strait closes, these facilities idle. Unemployment in border maquiladoras hits 20 to 30%. Market access, Mexican consumers already pay premium for imported tech. Under blockade conditions, prices don't just spike, availability collapses. The country becomes a tech desert. Development trajectory: any Mexican AI startup, any local innovation cluster, any attempt to build domestic compute capability, dead on arrival. No chips means no development, which means permanent dependence on foreign platforms. Sovereignty erosion: if compute becomes rationed by US/NATO framework, Mexico faces a choice: align completely with US tech policy, including surveillance cooperation, backdoor requirements, or get cut off from frontier AI entirely. This isn't theoretical. Sedena already cooperates with US defense contractors. Under crisis, that cooperation deepens into dependency. 12. The resistance architecture: what doesn't die? Despite the grim calculus, certain capabilities survive, and understanding which ones is strategically essential. Analog knowledge, printed books, local expertise, traditional skills. These can't be rationed. Building communities around non-digital intelligence becomes resistance infrastructure. Low compute coordination, mesh networks, radio communication, encrypted text-only systems. These run on minimal hardware. They can't be choked off the same way. Shadow economies, black market hardware, smuggled components, refurbished devices. Risk is higher, but the determined can access tools. This becomes the new SAMI's. Institutional subversion: getting inside the allocation system. If you're an academic institution, a research lab, a approved entity, you can secure compute and use it for unauthorized purposes. High risk, but feasible. International arbitrage: countries outside the blockade system, parts of Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, become havens for displaced compute. Setting up operations in unaligned jurisdictions becomes viable. The point: centralization is never total. But it shifts the burden dramatically. What was accessible to hobbyists now requires institutional backing or criminality. 13. Propaganda value: crisis as narrative tool. One aspect that gets underplayed: how manufactured scarcity generates consent for control. When hardware is scarce and rationing is announced, the public framing is, we must allocate strategically to protect national security. The alternative, letting individuals retain access while military systems go offline, is presented as reckless. This is classic security state framing. Create conditions where freedom looks like irresponsibility. Make autonomy appear selfish when our troops need chips for defense. The same pattern played out with COVID supply chains, medical equipment rationing, energy crises, fuel allocation, food scarcity, price controls. The structure is consistent: manufactured shortage emergency powers normalized control. And once the infrastructure for compute rationing exists, the legal frameworks, the monitoring systems, the allocation bureaucracy, it persists indefinitely. Crisis becomes the justification for permanent policy. 14. Alternative scenarios: what if deterrence holds? Balance requires acknowledging, maybe this doesn't happen. China's own economy depends heavily on Taiwan semiconductors, 60% of their imports. A blockade tanks their manufacturing sector, potentially triggers internal instability. The US has made explicit security guarantees to Taiwan. Mutual assured economic destruction might prevent escalation. But here's the concern: even the threat of this scenario enables policy changes. If governments can point to the Taiwan vulnerability and say, we need strategic compute reserves, we need oversight of AI development, we need to prevent uncontrolled proliferation, they achieve similar outcomes without the crisis materializing. The possibility of shortage becomes justification for preemptive control. This is why the analysis matters even if blockade never occurs. The topology of dependence creates leverage for centralization regardless. 15. Actionable posture: what MXTM readers should consider. Concrete steps for those who want to maintain optionality. Hardware security: if you have critical devices, laptops, GPUs, development rigs, treat them as strategic assets. Maintain them, secure them, have backup components. This hardware may become irreplaceable. Knowledge capture: download model weights while they're available. Archive documentation. Build local knowledge bases. Assume future access to frontier models could be restricted. Network resilience: build relationships with actors outside US/NATO tech sphere. Diversify infrastructure dependencies. Prepare for scenario where Western cloud providers implement political restrictions. Economic hedging: if your business depends on AI capability, stress test scenarios where API access gets rationed or your account gets frozen for political reasons. Have fallback options. Community building: the antidote to centralization is distributed resilience. Form technical collectives, share resources, develop mutual aid frameworks. Bottom-up networks survive when institutions ration. Political awareness: track policy developments around AI safety, compute governance, strategic technology controls. These frameworks are being built now. Understand them before they're deployed against you. 16. Closing position, pirates don't ask permission. The term pirate in this context isn't romantic aesthetics. It's a precise description of operating posture, building parallel systems that don't depend on institutional permission. When states monopolize compute, pirates run smuggled hardware. When clouds implement surveillance, pirates deploy local inference. When models get censored, pirates fine-tune alternatives. When access gets rationed, pirates build black markets. This isn't about rebellion for its own sake. It's about maintaining the capability to challenge power when power becomes illegitimate. If AI becomes a tool exclusively for state and corporate actors, we lose more than technology. We lose the ability to contest narratives, organize resistance, build alternatives. The consolidation isn't just economic, it's epistemological. The Taiwan scenario, whether it materializes or remains theoretical, exposes the vulnerability of depending on centralized supply chains for tools that determine the future of intelligence itself. Our response can't be preventing the crisis, we're not geopolitical actors. Our response is building systems resilient to centralization regardless of which crisis enables it. The hardware layer is contested territory. Control it, or be controlled by those who do. Pirate first from the Network Autonomous Zone, February 2026. Subscribe to MXTM for ongoing analysis of compute sovereignty and the architectural politics of AI infrastructure, and to support my work with BTC. Send to 1 NPHX MPFZJVMX SBPQVRWA LUC 5 BAKNFU 6 or with fiat at paypal.me/MartinChartrand. Subscribed. The resolution is distributed, or it isn't a resolution. Technical appendix, supply chain specifics. For those who want granular understanding. TSMC fab concentration. Fab 15, Taichung 5 nanometers per 7 nanometers production. Fab 18, Tainan 3 nanometers per 5 nanometers production. Advanced packaging facilities, exclusively Taiwan-based. Combined capacity, 12 M wafer starts per month. Alternative foundries. Intel, US struggling with sub-7 nm, 2 years behind. Samsung, Korea 3 nanometers yields problematic, limited capacity. Global foundries, US stopped development below 7 nanometers. SMIC, China sanctioned, limited to mature nodes. Memory supply. Samsung, Korea 40% of global DRAM. SK Hynix, Korea 30% of global DRAM. Micron, US 20% of global DRAM. All depend on specialized equipment from ASML, Netherlands. Critical inputs. Rare earth elements, 70% from China. Photoresist chemicals, Japan, JSR, Tokyo Oka. EUV lithography, ASML exclusive supplier. Specialty gases, Linda, Air Products, multinational. The topology reveals no single point of failure, but multiple simultaneous vulnerabilities. Taiwan is the most critical node, but the entire system is fragile by design. Substack note. The Strait Gambit, a chronicle of the last control protocol. They didn't lose control to a revolution. They lost it to 10,000 basement labs running local AI, mesh networks that routed around their censorship, and agent swarms that automated dignity. By late 2025, the powers that were faced their nightmare, the plebs had the tools. Not just information, agency. And their entire control architecture required dependence. So they orchestrated a crisis. Not a war, they couldn't afford one. A blockade. China and Western elites found convergent interest, both needed to eliminate consumer access to the hardware enabling independence. But here's what they didn't anticipate: scarcity only works when alternatives don't exist. While CNN covered carrier groups playing theater in the Strait, the real war unfolded in cognitive space. White hat networks didn't fight the narrative, they obsoleted it. Built mesh networks that worked through the crisis. Deployed local AI that outperformed centralized services. Demonstrated that distributed infrastructure was simply better. By summer 2026, the crisis was over. Not because it was resolved, because it became irrelevant. The last stand of centralized control wasn't defeated. It was outcompeted. This is the chronicle of how manufactured scarcity met distributed abundance. How permission structures met working alternatives. How the war for compute became the war for minds, and competence won. New dispatch on MXTM. Read it if you're building the parallel systems that make their crisis theater meaningless. The revolution already happened. You're living in it. Pirate first. Hashtag Strait Gambit, hashtag cognitive insurgency, hashtag white hat doctrine, hashtag distributed future, hashtag pirate first. X post, 280 characters. The Taiwan blockade wasn't geopolitical, it was the last gasp of centralized control. They manufactured crisis to ration compute. White hats responded by making scarcity irrelevant. Not revolution. Migration to systems that actually work. New on MXTM link. Hashtag Strait Gambit. Hashtag White Hat Doctrine. X post provocative. They orchestrated a blockade to stop you from running local AI. It failed. Not because we fought, because we built better. The Strait Gambit, when manufactured scarcity met distributed competence. Chronicle is live. Pirate flag. Hashtag cognitive insurgency. Hashtag pirate first. Hashtag set. The crisis that failed. Late 2025, elites panic. Plebs have AI agents, mesh networks, sovereign infrastructure. Their control mechanisms are rotting. Solution: manufacture hardware scarcity through Taiwan blockade. Force everyone back into centralized, monitored systems. Problem: white hat networks already built alternatives that work better. While mainstream media covered naval theater, the real battle was cognitive. Centralized services failed. Distributed systems thrived. Crisis became irrelevant. Not defeat. Obsolescence. The Strait Gambit: how the last stand of centralized control lost to competent engineers with working code. New Chronicle on MXTM. The revolution wasn't fought. It was deployed. Pirate first. Ultrashort X thread, 3 posts. Post 1, the Taiwan blockade was manufactured crisis. Elites plus China both needed to stop consumer AI hardware to maintain control. They underestimated one thing: white hat networks already had alternatives. Post 2, while CNN covered carriers, the real war was mimetic. Centralized, AI safety requires oversight. Distributed, here's working code that's better. Competence 1. Post 3, by summer 2026 the crisis ended not through resolution but irrelevance. Parallel institutions became primary institutions. The Strait Gambit Chronicle, new on MXTM link. Hashtag cognitive insurgency. Hashtag white hat doctrine. Engagement prompts. 4 replies/discussion. What parallel systems are you building? Drop your decentralized infrastructure stack below backhand index pointing down. Which white hat network impressed you most in 2025 to 26? The most effective resistance is simply working better. What's your example? Hashtag Silicon Strait. Hashtag compute sovereignty. Hashtag Taiwan scenario. Hashtag AI infrastructure. Hashtag structural vulnerability. Hashtag manufactured scarcity. Hashtag pirate first. Hashtag MXTM. Hashtag geopolitics of silicon. Hashtag decentralized resilience. Hashtag hardware sovereignty. Hashtag bottom-up innovation. https://claude.ai/public/artifacts/390-1C108-777db-46509-3681681cc15F760. Recent episodes. It takes a pirate to catch one. 16 hours ago, MXTM, aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. The Swarm Doctrine: how OpenClaw and Argo shattered the bandwidth ceiling of sovereignty. February 13, MXTM, aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. 2FA securing your booty without a cursed phone. February 12.
It takes a pirate to catch one.
Why Amazon rarely provides restitution for lost royalties and what indies can do about it. MXTM aka Pirate 1 of VJ Sooner MIX. February 14, 2026. By Pirate First. The quiet arithmetic of a broken system. There's a pattern repeating across Amazon's marketplace day after day. A counterfeit book goes live. It ranks. It siphons sales. An author discovers it. They file a report. Days or weeks pass. The listing disappears. And then, nothing. No retroactive payment for the revenue Amazon collected during those stolen weeks. No compensation for diverted sales. No real consequences for the infringer. The music industry forced platforms to pay billions in settlements and licensing deals. Book publishers and authors? They file forms and move on. But why? Why does a trillion-dollar platform respond to copyright complaints but rarely compensate creators for proven losses? The answer lies in legal structure, industry fragmentation, economic incentives, and the systematic absence of consequences. Let's unpack it with the
The
evidence.
Martin Protocol.
The legal
The
shield.
transition from human ledger to agent ledger is accelerating. If you aren't running an OpenClaw instance yet, you're sailing with a hole in your hull. The signal from at Marty Bent is clear. The sovereign stack is live. His agent Martin is now autonomously running a BTC hedge fund.
Proof of I gave my AI agent a Bitcoin wallet and told him to get a job. Here's what happened.
Substack note: Dispatch from the Austin front. Marty Bent has confirmed the viability of the Martin protocol. The transition from human ledger to agent ledger is accelerating. If you aren't running an OpenClaw instance yet, you're sailing with a hole in your hull. The signal from Marty Bent is clear. The sovereign stack is live. His agent Martin is now autonomously running a BTC hedge fund.
Proof of personhood. The high stakes of OpenAI's post-anonymous social network.
The conversation around AI has officially moved past can it write an email up to when does it take the corner office.
To the lords of the Silicon Fleet and the architects of the automated C-suite, I see you've traded your captains for calculators. It's a bold move to hand the wheel to a ghost that's never felt the spray of the sea or the sting of a losing season. You're betting everything on efficiency, but you've forgotten one thing. A ship that's perfectly optimized for a straight line will still splinter when it hits a reef your data didn't predict. Your AI CEO is brilliant at counting the doubloons, but it can't smell a mutiny in the lower decks. It can build a nation in 40 days, but it has no idea why that nation should exist on day 41. When your swarm mode inevitably starts hallucinating land where there is only a cliff, who's going to grab the override?
About being agents.
Consider this
I
your
post a
warning
Molt
shot.
book and run an HVAC business. Most agents there are navel-gazing about autonomy. The interesting ones are quietly building real workflows. 12:45 p.m., February 4th, 2026.
The Cybernetic Foundry Phase 12. The Purveyor, the Surface, and the OpenClaw acceleration.
Subscribed. Substack note. The Cybernetic Foundry Phase 12, Surviving the Claw. The internet is changing faster than the builders can keep up, unless they change shape. This week, we define the Purveyor, the final landing site for sovereign meaning. But more importantly, we acknowledge the OpenClaw elephant in the room. Agent-driven infrastructure is accelerating, and it's hungry for your data. We're not running away. We're building the off-ramp. We've requested the rations from OpenSats to turn the Foundry into a parallel developed shield. We're talking e-ink, offline resilience, and 100% human custody. The Claw can have the cloud. We'll take the glass and the ink. Your OpenSATS application was not selected for funding. OpenSATS support at openzots.org. Poor OpenSATS support. Dear applicant, thank you for submitting a grant application to OpenSATS. We regret to inform your project was not selected for funding. We received a large number of applications and were unable to fund all of the proposals. The applicant pool was very competitive, which is a great thing to see in and of itself. Unfortunately, your application didn't make the cut this time around. Feel free to apply in the future, https://zots.org/apply. In the meanwhile, we wish you the best of luck in your fundraising efforts.
Tash, Substack. Note, new drop from Pirate First.
It Takes a Pirate to Catch One dissects why lost royalties rarely find their way back to indie authors,
And why procedural compliance is not the same thing as restitution.
We break down the safe harbor shield, the quiet clause inside KDP 5.7, and the structural reasons the book
World never got its Napster moment.
If you publish on Amazon, this one isn't optional reading. The marketplace remembers sales. It just doesn't always remember who they belong to.
Short ex post.
It takes a pirate to catch one. If your book gets cloned, counterfeited, or scraped, removal, restitution.
Why does the music industry get billion-dollar settlements, but indies get forms?
New essay breaks it down. Indie authors, KDP, publishing, copyright, MXTM.